$28 million. That was the amount that TD Bank was forced to pay in the United States to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for misreporting consumer credit data. It's just so like, how could this even happen? And what are you going to do? A small price for a big bank, but for the individuals involved, this could have been a really big price. So we're going to talk about this issue and what you can do about it if you find that your information is not accurate either. Julie Kuzmic is the Senior Compliance Officer, Consumer Advocacy at Equifax Canada, and she joins us now. Hello there, Julie.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, Bruce.
It is great to talk to you. Misreporting of data, that is a very big phrase. What are some examples of things that could include? What could be going on that we need to pay attention to?
Well, we always are advising people to keep an eye on the data on their credit reports, and this is one of the reasons why. So there are a few ways that inaccurate data could land on your credit report. One of them is similar to that TD example that you mentioned, where it does happen on occasion that a bank or lender or credit card issuer might have a glitch in the system and they accidentally send the wrong balances, or if accounts have been closed, they accidentally sent them as an open status or something along those lines. When that is the cause of incorrect data, they usually do figure it out pretty quickly and they'll contact us and say, it looks like we had a blip here. This is the amount of data. We're going to need to make sure we get that corrected. So the odd time that happens, we work with whomever that creditor is and make sure that everything gets corrected on the affected people's credit reports. So that's one scenario where incorrect information can land on your credit report. Another one is where, and this one is usually when people have a rather common name or a common first initial and last name, particularly in high density urban areas where you might have a huge condo building, say in Toronto or Vancouver, where hundreds of people have the same literal address, same postal code, and potentially there are multiples with the same first letter and last name. There are cases where there can be a mismatch where someone else's collections item gets reported to the credit bureau and their data looks close enough to yours that for some reason it lands on your credit report. So that's another possibility where you can end up seeing not quite the right data on your own report.
Oh, it's kind of scary. How common is this? How often does this happen?
It's not actually that common, but when you look at the millions of Canadians that exist and use credit in this country, even a very small error rate can affect a handful of people. And obviously, one person with incorrect data on their credit report is one person too many. We want the data to be correct. And so we do have a process where people can let us know something doesn't look right. And we have steps to then investigate and make changes where they are warranted.
So something could happen for the two scenarios you talked about. It seems like a big role for the consumer is to highlight that as an issue, which means they got to be looking at that credit report with some frequency. What are your tips for ensuring that consumers do that work themselves? How often, where, what should they look for?
Often the advice has been to check your credit reports at least once a year from both of the major bureaus, Equifax and TransUnion. We now have an ability for consumers to see their own credit report free of charge online as many as 12 times a year. So as much as once monthly, you can log into that free account that you create on the Equifax website. You can get a score generated and you can see that data. There are options for people who maybe need a little more peace of mind than that, or have experienced fraud in the past and want to be able to keep a closer eye on things. There are monitoring products that you can buy directly from Equifax and identity theft insurance and a number of those things. So there's a spectrum of options there, but at the lowest effort, no cost end of the spectrum, just logging into the Equifax website once a month, even every other month is a great idea to take a look at what your credit report is showing.
So I'm seeing that portal or whatever you call it. It's got a list of information. What would you say? How would you guide my eye on that page? Am I looking at accounts that aren't mine? Am I looking at balances that might not be accurate? What should I be looking for specifically?
Well, there are a few things. A good place to start is, first of all, making sure that your age and date of birth, or those are the same thing actually, your name and date of birth are accurate. If you have chosen to provide a social insurance number in the past and that is on the credit report, you want to make sure those things are all accurate as far as your own identity goes. And then the next place to look is what we call the inquiry section. That is the access log of every time your credit report has been accessed. Even if it's you looking at your own report, that will be entered in the log. And sometimes people will ask, like, well, I know I looked at it last month. I don't need to see that listed there that I was looking at it. But what if you didn't look at it last month and you see that you are listed there as looking at it last month? That could be an indicator that somebody has found a way to impersonate you and access your credit report. So that's something you really want to pay attention to. Or even a financial institution that you haven't applied for anything at, and you see that they have accessed your report. They can't do that without your consent. So somebody has offered your consent for that to have happened. So that's the second area. And then third is where you see the accounts themselves. You want to make sure you recognize all the accounts that are there are definitely accounts that you have or have had in the past.
So in the unlikely scenario in which there is an error there, and maybe it's an honest to goodness error, maybe it is an early indicator of fraudulent activity, what do you do?
The best thing to do is go to the website, equifax.ca, and the process for indicating something doesn't look right is called the dispute process. And it can confuse people a little because even if you're just looking to update your address, so the original address on your file was correct, it's just that you've now moved. And so you want to provide, here's my new address, so you've got all the right information. That is still considered a dispute technically. So just to kind of bridge that gap for people, even though you're not saying the previous one was wrong.
I'm not wagging my finger, I just moved.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the process there is outlined. There's a secure platform for sending files electronically. And this is the part that can be frustrating for people. You have to prove you are who you say you are, and you have to provide the evidence around the claim that you're making. So for example, if there is an item in collections on your credit report and you notice that it's no longer showing that it is paid, but it was paid in the past, you would have some documentation that you could send along that says, here's the receipt or the evidence that this did get paid on this date. So please get that corrected. So for those ones, we're able to evaluate that evidence and make the appropriate update. There are cases where if somebody is saying, there's a whole credit card on here that isn't mine, that feels very obvious to the person themselves. So like, while I'm talking to you on the phone, please take it off because I'm telling you it's not mine. The less obvious part is that there are people who try to claim that legitimate credit isn't theirs because they're maybe looking for a way to not have to pay it. And we are required to then do an investigation. So we will then contact that credit card issuer and say, this person is saying the account isn't theirs. Please get back to us with your confirmation that, oh no, that's correct. Here's the correct information for the person. Or actually, no, this person did sign an agreement. This is definitely the correct person. That is their account. And there can be a bit of time in there. So sometimes we have to wait 10 days or even a little more to hear back from the bank or the credit card issuer when we're running that investigation. So I just want people to understand what's happening behind the scenes. It's not that nobody cares or isn't doing anything about it. It's just sometimes those
Takes some
steps.
time. What about on the inquiries front? Because if I see a store card, an inquiry on a store card, for example, who's to say whether I made that application or not? Does the investigation still have to unfold in the same way?
It depends a little bit on the nature of the inquiry. So one of the purposes of the inquiry is to notify the consumer that their credit report has been viewed. So even if it was viewed because somebody impersonated you, that's still important information for you to know that it did get accessed. So there are a number of possibilities when you contact us and say, this was not me. In some cases, we're able to verify with the institution that, oh, there must have been some confusion about whether consent was offered, or they can kind of figure out a bit more on their end what's going on. So there are cases where inquiries might be removed, or they might be masked so that they're still present but not visible to lenders. There are a number of different potential possibilities there.
Interesting stuff. If you were to wrap this up with a bow and one tip that people should keep in mind to minimize the risk really of the impact. I mean, I don't know how you can control what a bank does or an error out there, but what is the one thing that you would ensure people do on a regular basis?
It's keep an eye on that credit report. All of the different credit scores are based on that data. And the worst time to realize that there is something not quite right on your credit report is when you're about to renew your mortgage, or you're trying to close on a purchase and their lender is telling you, like, we can't lend to you because you've got this item in collections, which isn't actually yours. So if you stay on top of it, you can get that stuff dealt with before it becomes a very urgent situation.
Feels like trying to declutter your house the day of the open house when you're trying to sell it. Don't do that. Do that beforehand. Make
Not
sure it's all
ideal.
pretty, right? Julie, thank you for your time and for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce.
Julie Kuzmic is with Equifax Canada. She is the Senior Compliance Officer, Consumer Advocacy, and she was here to talk about this issue of errors on your credit report and specifically what you should be looking for and what you can do to fix it.